All right, guys, this is going to be the first mock draft for this 2020 redraft fantasy football season. I really hope y'all enjoy it. This one, I'm going to bring y'all a mock draft from the first overall pick. I'm going to provide my live commentary as we make these picks. These are real dynasty fantasy football players. We are going to be participating in a redraft fantasy football league, though, because I know that's how most of y'all play. And yeah, let's jump right into it. I'm going to begin the draft. And I'm on the clock first. I have an easy pick here. I'm going to go with Christian McCaffrey. You're going to see Christian McCaffrey be the first pick in your fantasy football league in pretty much every draft that you do. Paz is on the clock here. Saquon Barkley, I think that's also the standard pick at 2. We see Ezekiel Elliott followed up real quick at 3. That's where it gets a little interesting. I think that Zeke is going to be there most of the time. Oh my gosh. We see Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the 104 ahead of Alvin Kamara, who goes at the 105. I would definitely recommend taking Alvin Kamara there at the 104 just because we know what he provides and we know that he's going to be able to provide it consistently. Now here at the 106, it's a little more interesting. We see Dalvin Cook and Michael Thomas mainly being the discussion here. And really, it just goes down to, do you think Dalvin Cook will hold out or not? And clearly, Dirty Dollar Bill does not. He takes Dalvin Cook. And now we see Michael Thomas, Derrick Henry. Michael Thomas is a very interesting pick. Usually we see the wide receiver 1 going off the board a lot earlier than this in most years, but we know that the running back position is extremely top heavy this year with 3 down studs, and the wide receiver position is deeper than it has ever been in years past. Now we see the second wide receiver already going off the board at the 109 with Davante Adams. Davante Adams is a really interesting pick this year in that I think that he can actually outproduce Michael Thomas. I know most people don't agree with me there, but if you look at the wide receiver options that Aaron Rodgers has in Green Bay, they are extremely limited. Joe Mixon at the 110. I don't necessarily think I would have gone with Joe Mixon here. I think the best player available on the board at this point is Miles Sanders, even though he is week to week with his hamstring strain. We see Josh Jacobs go at the 111. Like I said earlier, I think that Miles Sanders is the best pick just because he provides that receiving upside that we have not been able to see with Josh Jacobs or Joe Mixon. Now we see Big C go back-to-back with Austin Eckler and Miles Sanders. I love this start. I know Austin Eckler has been getting pushed up the board a little bit lately compared to where he was going earlier this offseason, yet that's for a great reason. He was extremely productive last year. Now we see El Camino follow up Josh Jacobs with Julio Jones. I do like this pick. This format, you have to start 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and a flex. So I think it lends to being a little bit more wide receiver heavy than most fantasy football formats. If you play in a league like this where you have to start 3 wide receivers, I think there's going to be merit with going with a wide receiver after your stud running back. Y'all are probably going to see me do that at the 2-3 turn because we are seeing these running backs get soaked up very early on in these fantasy drafts. And when you have an anchor like Christian McCaffrey, you can afford to go wide receiver with your 2nd and 3rd round pick. What we don't want to be doing here is we don't want to be going quarterback. I think quarterback, you can't take a guy like Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson until you get into that 3rd round range, maybe in the middle of the 3rd round. I think you continue to hammer out wide receivers and running backs where they're all getting soaked up right here. Maybe George Kittle comes into question if Paz passes on him at the 102. This is not a tight end premium league, but George Kittle still gives you a massive advantage at that tight end position that you're not necessarily going to find from any other player outside of Travis Kelce. This is going to be very interesting. I have 2 guys in mind. He goes with DJ Moore, so I think that makes my choice pretty clear. I could go with Kenny Golladay and Mike Evans, or I'm looking at Kenny Golladay and George Kittle. I'm actually going to lean Kenny Golladay, Mike Evans. I love George Kittle this year, but the thing is, in a non-tight end premium league, I'm going to be able to find a ton of tight end value later on in the draft, and you're most likely going to be able to see that if you stick around to the end of the video. I'm going to double tap the wide receivers here. We see a wide receiver run in the midst. We see 5 wide receivers off the board in a row. I believe that the best player on the board right now is either going to be Lamar Jackson or George Kittle, and I think that's what we're going to see Paz go here. But instead, he continues the wide receiver run, probably because the wide receiver heavy format where you can start up to 4 wide receivers and only 2 running backs. So now we see Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Hopkins going for the stars of the middle, and he follows it up with A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, real interesting. I'm surprised he didn't go with Lamar Jackson over A.J. Brown, but like I said, we are in the middle of this wide receiver run, and when you have to start 3 wide receivers, the position is deep, but you want to make sure that you can get them early on, and this is why I decided to pass up on George Kittle at that 2-3 turn and double tap those wide receivers, because I was worried about what the third round was going to bring in terms of depth at the wide receiver position and how deep they were going to go. We see Allen Robinson go off the board at the 305. I think that we see a clear drop off here after this DJ Chark, Tyler Lockett tier. So George Kittle, 306, fantastic value. I think the start of Dalvin Cook, Patrick Mahomes, George Kittle is great. I don't necessarily think I would have taken Patrick Mahomes that early, but still, you can't ignore the fact that you just got 3 top 5 players at their position. Now we see JMW go up with Jonathan Taylor. He has 3 running backs started off. I think if you go with that strategy, it is fine, but he's going to have to switch and hit the wide receiver position extremely hard with not having a guy when you need to start 3. Now, Dan in real life follows up Kenyon Drake with Chris Carson. I don't necessarily agree with this Chris Carson, David Johnson range. I think around this point, I would be switching over going wide receiver. I think that wide receiver tier is extremely flat, and after the Aaron Jones comes off the board in the second round, I think we see a massive drop-off at the running back position. But we see a ton of running back heavy teams near the end here. The board looks kind of funny with all the early teams double tapping wide receivers and all the teams in the back half of the draft loading up on these running backs. If we look at the players that are best available, yes, Sleeper says that it's Le'Veon Bell and Todd Gurley, but I'm going to let y'all know one thing. The people who draft on Sleeper are not near as sharp as other fantasy players, and I don't think that's necessarily what you want to be doing. I think you want to be going with wide receivers here. I don't think Le'Veon Bell is going to be able to provide you an advantage week to week over what a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster would. Mark Andrews at the 401 is a pick I absolutely love. I love Big C08, his start right now. Austin Eckler, Miles Sanders, Robert Woods, and Mark Andrews. He has the high upside with both running backs who could finish as RB1s. He has the wide receiver that's pretty much a lock to be at least a wide receiver 2. And then Mark Andrews is a guy that can possibly finish as the tight end 1 if he's able to take command of that offense after we see Hayden Hurst being traded to Atlanta. Amari Cooper, Juju Smith-Schuster, fantastic values at the 402, 403. We see S. Worthington really being able to take advantage of that early wide receiver hype and then going out there and loading up with running backs and following it up with a wide receiver afterwards. Now we see Dan in real life go Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon is a guy that I don't necessarily love to take here. Like I said, I think he's in the tier of running backs where I'm just kind of avoiding in this format, and I love the picks of Amari Cooper, Juju Smith-Schuster, Cooper Kupp, but Melvin Gordon will go higher in most fantasy football drafts than he did in this one. So if you are a fan of Melvin Gordon, that's where you want to take him. Goat Ballers continues to avoid the running back position. He might be in lockstep with me where we don't necessarily think that the running backs are the value at the moment. He goes DK Metcalf to pair Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill, and that is a deadly, deadly start. I'm hoping to see some running backs go off the board here after we see Calvin Ridley. The wide receiver position is really drying up, and this is going to make for an interesting decision for me. I'm hoping that I get 2 of DJ Chark, Tyler Lockett, Terry McLaurin, and Cortland Sutton to come back to me. But we see DJ Chark go off the board at the 409, and this is looking like it is going to be tough. Zach Ertz may be in the discussion here at the very end of the 4th round, beginning of the 5th. But I really wanted to wait on tight end. I just don't know if I'm going to have the wide receiver options available to me. And the last thing I want to do here is go running back. If I was going to be looking at the running back position, I would be looking at Todd Gurley. But I think I'm going to prefer wide receiver given the format. Terry McLaurin goes off the board, and that just kills me. It completely throws my plans out the window. If we look at the wide receiver depth after this pick, I think that next round there's still going to be some guys that I like that I can find. So I know I said I was not going to do it, but I think I'm going to have to go with a tight end and a running back here. We just saw a massive, massive wide receiver run that I was not expecting. So I'm going to go Todd Gurley and Zach Ertz. What I'm hoping that this does is I'm hoping that it takes these Paz name parents and stars of the middle. They feel the need to go out there and get a running back already having their 3 wide receivers, and I'm hoping these teams can leave them going back to me. But if I were them, I would continue to smash that wide receiver position. We see Cam Akers go off the board at the 502, which that is great for us now that we have that first pick and we already have our Christian McCaffrey and Todd Gurley. Marquise Brown at the 503 is a guy that's been really skyrocketing up draft boards lately, and for a great reason. He looks to be a guy that really profiles nicely in Baltimore if they can increase their passing volume, which a lot of people expect them to do. Now here we are looking at a team that has 1 running back and 3 wide receivers. Going to be extremely interesting. Oh, they go Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray makes a lot of sense with DeAndre Hopkins in the second round. Now I love the correlation there. I love that you're pretty much betting on this Arizona Cardinals offense to be one of the best offenses in the league. And if that happens, you're going to have a fantastic fantasy football team, especially with guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, A.J. Brown, DJ Chark, all having a ton of upside on their own. Now, Moneyballer here is probably going to be looking wide receiver. Yes, he takes Courtland Sutton. That does hurt me. I'm really wanting some of these wide receivers to fall back to me. Mark Ingram, that is a great pick for us. We do not want these running backs to continue to slide down the draft board. Hopefully we see Le'Veon Bell, Devin Singletary, Raheem Mostert, and David Montgomery go off the board soon. I would also like if we can find a quarterback later on in the draft, and I don't want to have to push up the Dak Prescott, the Russell Wilson tier at this next turn, especially with not having any of their wide receivers. We see Darren Waller go here at the 507. This is a pick that I am kind of intrigued by just because I don't think that he was the best value on the board. I think you really had to be in a bad position there if you've gone 3 wide receivers already. I would just go out there and actually take my 4th wide receiver, lock in that flex that's going to be a wide receiver, take a guy like Keenan Allen, especially with the Mike Williams injury as of late, and then you really push all the other teams to soak up the wide receivers after you, and then you can probably get some running back / tight end value later on in the draft. But now I am just on the board looking, praying that wide receivers fall back to me. We're looking at a couple running back heavy teams here, and yes, they are soaking up these wide receivers, which is not good for our team build. The only running back that intrigues me coming back would be a Kareem Hunt or a Ronald Jones, but outside of that, I am really looking at this wide receiver position. I would love a Stephon Diggs, a Will Fuller, or a Michael Gallup. And we see Kareem Hunt, the one running back that I was interested in, coming off the board. El Camino has a fantastic, fantastic team right now, just soaking up pretty much the best value in every round, in my opinion. Josh Jacobs at the 111. I would probably have gone Miles Sanders there, but I understand with the injury moving Josh Jacobs ahead of him. Julio Jones at the 202, a fantastic wide receiver that you can bank production from. James Conner, a guy with a ton of upside at the very end of the 3rd. Amari Cooper in the 4th round and Kareem Hunt at the very end of the 5th. Those are all fantastic high upside picks that you can build your team around. Raheem Mostert at the 601, that is what we want to be looking for. We want to be looking for those grinding running backs going off the board. The last thing I need to see is a Le'Veon Bell, a Devin Singletary, or a David Montgomery still being on the draft board when we come back up with the 6.12. What I am personally hoping for is I'm hoping for a Michael Gallup, an A.J. Green, or any of these wide receivers, really. But we locked ourselves in here. Maybe this is a lesson to be learned. Maybe we should have gone with the Marquise Brown, Courtland Sutton at the 4 and 5 turn. But this is why we are doing our research. This is why we are mock drafting. We are trying to see how these draft boards are going to fall. Now at the 604, we see one of our targets, Michael Gallup, go off the board right after his quarterback in Dak Prescott. Tyler Boyd goes off the board afterwards. Finally, we get some good news. Le'Veon Bell going off the board as Goat Ballers as his first running back. That is a roster that I'm really, really liking. I would have liked it even more if they went with the Devontae Parker instead of the Darren Waller. But I may be just overvaluing the dip I expect Darren Waller to take after they add in a ton of pass catchers to that offense with the emergence of Hunter Renfrow, with the addition of Bryan Edwards and Henry Ruggs. Now, Ronald Jones off the board at the 607. This is good news for us. We want these running backs coming off the board. Hopefully, we see a Devin Singletary and a David Montgomery come off. DeAndre Swift, 608, another running back that I actually would have been interested in. David Montgomery, with his injury, sliding all the way down to the 609. David Montgomery was pretty much off my draft board, regardless of injury or not. I am not a big fan of David Montgomery. Now, I know I was looking wide receiver, but this is where we have to pivot. We have to be aware of the value on the board. Russell Wilson comes off, and that's what I was expecting to have to go to if he continued to go. But we have Deshaun Watson available to us, and we have J.K. Dobbins, both players with a ton of upside. The problem with taking a J.K. Dobbins, though, because I'm going to lock in Deshaun Watson right now, is I am essentially committing myself to needing to go out there and get wide receivers no matter what in the coming rounds. It does not give me that flexibility where if I would get an AJ Green, I could go out there and really take whatever value fell to me from here on out. But I'm going to gamble. I'm going to take J.K. Dobbins, who does have league-winning upside in his range of outcomes. And we are going to see if we can get some wide receivers falling to us at the 8-9 turn. This is one problem with picking at the very end. You don't know what is going to be available to you, so you just kind of have to take what comes and try to make demands high. And that's what we're doing with this quarterback position. We take the last of the available top guys with Deshaun Watson, and we really want to push the running backs up the draft board since we already have two, taking J.K. Dobbins. Now, this is great. We see Hayden Hurst come off at 702, James White come off at 703. This is exactly what we're asking for. Neither of those guys were on my draft board after taking Zach Ertz, and with taking a third running back when I only need to start two, what I am looking for is I am looking for upside. I am not looking for a floor, and what James White provides for you is a floor. He does not necessarily have a ton of upside, which is what I would be looking for with my running back three. So I do like seeing him come off the board. Now we see Evan Ingram come off. Good. We need to see these tight ends continue to come off the board after investing in Zach Ertz at the 501. Hopefully, Moneyballer picks here soon. I am really hoping that he goes with a Devin Singletary. Perfect. Devin Singletary did fall significantly further than he goes in most fantasy football drafts. I am just really off of Devin Singletary because similar to James White, I think he does have a decent floor, but with the addition of Zach Moss, with him being undersized, I question the ceiling there. Now we see AJ Green go off at the 706. Goat Ballers is up at the 707, and I think that he's going to have to go with a running back here, but the problem is there are really no running backs that get you excited, and this is the problem with not taking the position early, and you're going to have to invest a ton of roster spots into it if you decide to go wide receiver heavy. And we see actually him take Noah Fant at the 707. This is a pick that I do not agree with. I think that Noah Fant is a fantastic player, but when you already have Darren Waller and you spent the 5th round pick, does not make sense to go out there and get Noah Fant, in my opinion, at the 707. I would have preferred Antonio Gibson, who goes off at the 709. Antonio Gibson is a guy that has the size, he has the athleticism, and he has the pass-catching ability, pretty much everything that you could possibly ask for in a fantasy football running back. Now we see S. Worthington up on the board. He's taken 3 running backs in a row, 2 wide receivers, a quarterback. So I expect him to either go tight end or quarterback. He does go with Brandon Cooks, who I could have looked at the 701 to get a stack with Deshaun Watson, but I decided to pass up for J.K. Dobbins just because I thought that there was a chance that we saw a ton of running backs and tight ends go off the board between the 701 and the 812, which we have seen actually come into fruition. We've only seen 3 wide receivers come off the board since that 7th round pick. So maybe looking back on it, that was the right call to make, taking J.K. Dobbins at the 701. El Camino times out and takes Rob Gronkowski. If we look at the rest of his roster, maybe he would have actually gone with Rob Gronkowski if he did not time out. Anyway, he really needed a tight end all the way in the 7th round with them flying off the board with the Hayden Hurst, Evan Ingram, and Noah Fant. Now we see Big C08 coming up. Hopefully we don't see another timeout here. That would really start to ruin the mock. Maybe I'd have to speed it up. Maybe I'd have to turn into some auto picks. But instead of timing out, he goes out there, scrolls all the way down, and finds Phillip Lindsay. This is a pick that I don't necessarily agree with whatsoever, especially when you already have 3 running backs on your roster. I don't get the Phillip Lindsay selection. I would have much rather gone with a guy like any wide receiver available, Deontay Johnson, Deebo Samuel, Marvin Jones, CeeDee Lamb, I think all of those guys would have had a better upside for your roster build than a Phillip Lindsay. We see El Camino come back up here at the 802. Hopefully we do not see another timeout. Instead, he goes out there and takes Drew Brees. Drew Brees, going to be completely honest, I thought that El Camino was shaping up to have one of the best rosters after the Will Fuller pick in the 6th round. But Drew Brees, I absolutely hate the pick when we're selecting our quarterbacks this early. You need quarterbacks that have rushing upside that could be the quarterback one overall, and Drew Brees does not have that in his range of outcomes anymore since they decided to change the offense and be a lower volume offense, and Drew Brees is not going to run out of the pocket, so I don't necessarily agree with that pick. Now we see more wide receivers coming off the board, which we do not want to see. We need to see some of these guys fall to us, but we see Deontay Johnson and Deebo Samuel go off at the 803, 804. Now, with our pick coming up, we are scrolling around on the board. I am seeing a couple guys such as Christian Kirk who stand out to me. Christian Kirk and Mecole Hardman are probably my picks here unless something crazy happens. Now, Jalen Reagor, the first rookie wide receiver off the board, makes a ton of sense. I don't think it necessarily makes a ton of sense to go with Jalen Reagor over a running back that would have been available like a Tariq Cohen after the David Montgomery injury, just due to the fact that you already have 3 wide receivers on your roster. But trust me, I tend to be a guy that loves to build around wide receiver depth. I just think that the way this board has fallen, maybe the running back would have been the value there. Now, the CeeDee Lamb at the 807, that's another guy that I was secretly considering at the 812, but Emmanuel Sanders at the 808, I absolutely hate this pick. I don't know how far down you had to scroll to make it, but I mean, he's a guy that would have been available later on in the draft. And this is surprising coming from Moneyballer, who's just soaked up value round after round. Zach Moss at the 809, I think that's a good pick with the upside. I'm surprised to see him go so close to Devin Singletary, but I think that's the correct pricing for the 2 wide receivers. Just you tend to not see it. Now, we are 1 pick away. We see Tariq Cohen, Damian Harris go off the board before us. This is perfect. Now, this is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to be double tapping wide receivers here, and this is what they allowed us to do. Christian Kirk is the easy pick, in my opinion, followed up with a Mecole Hardman. Both of these guys, in my opinion, have great floors and great ceilings. Josh Allen at the 902, great pick. The exact opposite pick of Drew Brees at the 802, where Josh Allen actually does have the upside due to his rushing ability to finish as the quarterback 1 overall. And yes, I know some of y'all are going to hate for me to say that, but we have to be aware that fantasy football is completely different than real life NFL football, where Drew Brees is a significantly better quarterback than Josh Allen. But in fantasy, what matters is rushing production and overall volume. And I believe that Josh Allen will have the opportunity to outscore Drew Brees in both categories. TJ Hawkinson, 903. Great pick after we see the other tight end prices. And this is why I wanted to wait later on to take the tight end. Yet I got suckered into taking Zach Ertz at the 501. Now we see Moneyballer timeout and take Darius Slayton. This is about where Darius Slayton goes anyway, so it's not that big of a deal of a timeout. And let's see his overall roster construction, where he has just hammered wide receivers and running backs after taking Travis Kelce in round 2. I think that's a great pick besides the Emmanuel Sanders at the 808. He has a fantastic team overall. Now, Dirty Dollar Bill is up at the 906. Hopefully we don't see a 3rd timeout of this draft, but I'm feeling we don't. And he takes Jamison Crowder. Great pick. Jamison Crowder is a guy that pretty much is the last man standing in New York. We see Denzel Mims and Brashad Perriman both dealing with injuries. Marlon Mack at the 907. Henry Ruggs at the 908. Goat Ballers at the 907. I think that's a fantastic pick with Marlon Mack, just due to the high floor that he's going to give you in early weeks. Not expecting Jonathan Taylor to take that job extremely soon. I expect him to load up with a ton of 0 RB candidates later on in the draft. Tyler Higbee, 909. I'm not necessarily a guy who's a big fan of Tyler Higbee, but you cannot ignore the value that was there at 909. Great pick. Now we're looking at the best players available, in my opinion, being these quarterbacks with the Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz tier. I'm hoping that when it gets back to me, I'm going to be able to load up on a couple of these 0 RB candidates If we go through, I'll identify those for y'all, like a Tevin Coleman, an Alexander Madison, a Kerryon Johnson, a Chase Edmonds, and A.J. Dillon. I would like those guys to come around to that next turn. If we look at the wide receiver position, it's drying up a little bit. We still have intriguing guys such as Preston Williams, Sterling Shepard, and Brandon Ayuk. But other than that, I think I want to swing for the fences with these zero running back strategy builds. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to soak up the Alexander Madison prototypes. Jordan Howard goes off at the 9-11. Let's see El Camino's team. And I agree with that pick if he's going to be your running back 4, just because he has bankable volume, even though you know that the ceiling is going to be very low for Jordan Howard in Miami when he does not catch passes and when he does not have a great offensive line. Matt Ryan at the 10-01, great pick. This is why I did not want to spend the 6-12 on Deshaun Watson. But I promise you, this is where these quarterbacks should be going. If you play in a casual fantasy football league and you are taking them in the first and second round, I promise you that is a very bad strategy to partake in. Anthony Miller at the 10-02, that was actually a timeout. If we look at the board, I believe that Anthony Miller may have been the best player available. Actually, I don't think that he was. I think if we saw that not be a timeout, we would have seen a wide receiver, but a different wide receiver over Anthony Miller, such as a Sterling Shepard or Deshaun Jackson. Now, S. Worthington takes Latavius Murray at the 10-03. This is an interesting pick, following it up with his previous New Orleans Saints pick in Jared Cook. Chase Edmonds at the 10-04, that was a player that I was really hoping was going to fall back to me. He has an insane ceiling, especially with Kenyon Drake in a walking boot at the moment. JMW is up on the board, who's been killing it so far, having a very prototypical draft. He has a ton of wide receivers and running backs, and he takes his first quarterback with Carson Wentz at the 10-05. That may be my favorite draft so far, just because he's loaded up on all of the premium positions and just let value fall to him later on. See, Alexander Madison off at the 10-07, Tevin Coleman off at the 10-08. These were the players that I was targeting, but maybe we are going to have to pivot. We are definitely not going quarterback here after taking Deshaun Watson. I'm not going to take another quarterback this entire draft. I do not plan on taking Hunter Henry here, even though he may be a good value. I think we are going to have to go through, scroll down, find a decent couple running backs to take, because we already are sitting here with 4 wide receivers. Maybe we take 1 running back and 1 wide receiver, depending what falls to us. So if I'm taking a wide receiver here, I am most likely going to go with the Brandon Ayuk. What scares me is the injury Brandon Ayuk has been dealing with, but we know that Deebo Samuel is injured at the same time. And if I'm looking at running backs, I'm probably going to swing for the fences and get a guy like Tony Pollard. But let me think about it for 1 second. Lock in Brandon Ayuk, who I believe is a guy that has the upside to be one of my key contributors down the stretch. Now, if we're looking at the running back position, I think I may actually go with Kerryon Johnson, because Kerryon Johnson does have the upside to be an instant contributor if DeAndre Swift starts slow. So let's take Kerryon Johnson. Even though he is currently in a knee brace, he is still fully participating at practices. Let's roll through the team real quick. Christian McCaffrey at the 101, Kenny Golladay and Mike Evans at the 2-3 turn, followed with Todd Gurley, Zach Ertz at the 4-5, Deshaun Watson, J.K. Dobbins at the 6-7, Christian Kirk and Mecole Hardman at the 8-9, and Brandon Ayuk, Kerryon Johnson at the 10-11. Tony Pollard, a guy that I was considering, goes off at the 11-02. Duke Johnson, I love all of these running backs in this range. They all provide decent floors and extremely high ceilings. Now, let's see where stars in the middle goes. It's going to be interesting. And keep in mind, I think that whenever we go through, he goes with Hunter Henry at the 11-04, who's a great value. I mean, seeing Hunter Henry going between Duke Johnson and Adrian Peterson is kind of funny, considering that Mike Williams is already injured to start the season. Hunter Henry could be seeing a lot of targets in Los Angeles. Adrian Peterson is a guy, though, that I am most likely not going to be taking on any of my fantasy teams, just because I feel that the ceiling is extremely limited with Adrian Peterson at this point in his career. We see Dirty Dollar Bill timeout with Tom Brady. And this is a pick that I hate to see, just because it was a timeout and you know that he would not have taken Tom Brady here At least I would really hope he did not take Tom Brady here after taking Patrick Mahomes in the second round. We see Boston Scott go off at the 11:07. Fantastic pick for GOAT Ballers, having one of the best drafts in the league. Boston Scott's a guy that you can play weekly just due to his receiving floor, and he does have the ceiling with Miles Sanders being week to week of being an RB2 right out of the get-go. Keyshawn Vaughn at 11:08. This is a player that's been consistently falling all offseason. I was telling everyone in dynasty leagues to sell him during rookie draft season, but now we see that his value's actually probably been cut in half since then, mainly just due to Ronald Jones showing out in camp and with Keyshawn Vaughn being on the COVID list. Jerick McKinnon, a player that's really flying up draft boards at the 11:10. I understand why he's flying up draft boards. I love getting a little bit of Jerick McKinnon myself, but I think here in the 11th is way too rich for my blood, especially considering you only had 4 more picks to your next one where you could have most likely gotten him in the 12th round. Now, at the 11-12, it's going to be interesting to see where Big C08 goes after really having a balanced team overall. He has 2 tight ends, 1 quarterback, and the rest is loaded up on running backs and wide receivers, which is probably the ideal build in this format. He goes with Darrell Williams over He goes with Darrell Williams over a player like Aaron Rodgers, which I don't necessarily agree with. I don't think that Darrell Williams is the running back to own in Kansas City. I think I would much rather go with Washington just for that backup role, but I agree with the thought process. Washington's a guy that I'm actually going to be looking at myself when it comes around in the 12th round. Mike Gesicki in the 12th round. This is why I did not want to go out there and take Zach Ertz in the 5th. This is why you should wait on tight end, pick up some of these extremely high upside guys at the very end of drafts, and just load up with your running backs and wide receivers. But this is why we do these mock drafts. This is why we can learn where value is throughout the draft. Now, let's scroll across the board. I just want to show you all the best players available. At the quarterback position, it's really Aaron Rodgers and then a sharp drop-off in tiers. The running back position, we see Sony Michel, who's been falling drastically lately due to his injury concerns. Dallas Goedert at the 12:05, that may be the best pick of the draft, especially considering that he's paired with Carson Wentz. That's fantastic value, and that's, again, why I did not want to take Zach Ertz with my 5th round pick. At the wide receiver position, the best values are a John Brown, Deshaun Watson, Justin Jefferson. See Michael Pittman go off at the 12:07. I don't necessarily agree with that. If you watched our YouTube video from a couple days ago, I don't think that Michael Pittman is going to be able to be an instant contributor in 2020. Now, at the tight end position, we still have a Chris Herndon, an Eric Ebron, and a Blake Jarwin, but definitely Dallas Goedert was the last in that tier. So the 12:05, that was a fantastic pick. I think here, if I'm looking at the board, I may end up having to go with a guy like Sony Michel, even though he does not necessarily have that extremely high upside. I think that he is going to be the best player available, especially if we look at the wide receiver position. It's really drying up. I think that we have to continue to hammer in these high upside running backs. It's going to be down between Sony Michel and DeAndre Washington for me. If we look at the Paris Campbell just goes off the board. So what I'm thinking here is I have 5 wide receivers. I already have a nice built-in floor and ceiling with the wide receivers. I think we're going to double tap running backs because with running backs, you know when to start them. You know when they're going to be getting those touches, and that's what you want at your bench spot. So we're going to go with Sony Michel, who's been falling like a rock lately, and then we're going to follow it up with a DeAndre Washington, who has not been playing with the ones in Kansas City. He's actually been running behind Darrell Williams, but I believe that's just due to him being a late acquisition this offseason, and DeAndre Washington is going to be able to get that number 2 job in Kansas City, which should be extremely valuable. Now we see the first kicker going off the board. If you watched my waiver wire video from yesterday, you know that I am actually advocating for going out there and getting premium kickers and defenses this season. That way you can focus your waiver wire attention on the running back and wide receiver position due to the high variability that COVID is going to bring. But still, I don't think I necessarily agree with going Harrison Butker here with the 13th round pick. Now we are going to scour across the board and try to find our next player that we are going to target. I believe that Robbie Anderson may actually be the best wide receiver on the board here behind John Brown, but I would be surprised if John Brown makes it back to us. We see Benny Snell, who's supposedly been the number 2 running back in Pittsburgh, go off at the 1306. I think that is a fantastic pick. Now, if we look at the tight end position, maybe I do want to go out there and get a second tight end, but the only guys that really appeal to me are Eric Ebron, Blake Jarwin, and that's about it. And that's why we went out there and invested the 5th round pick into Zach Ertz. If I don't feel the need to go and get an Eric Ebron, if I don't think that there's a valuable tight end to be my tight end too, I'm not even going to pick up a second one. I'm going to start Zach Ertz every single week. And during Zach Ertz bye week, I am just going to play the waiver wire. Anthony McFarland goes at the 309, very similar to Darrington Evans and Benny Snell. We just need a running back injury ahead of them, and then they have instant value, which is what I think we should be looking at in this range. I think we should be looking at these premium handcuff type running backs. See Joe Burrow go off at the 13th pick. Is this his first quarterback? No, this is after Dak Prescott. That is a very interesting pick. Then I think if you spend a premium pick on a Dak Prescott like that, you should not necessarily go out there and get a second quarterback. Whereas with El Camino, I completely agree getting his second quarterback in Daniel Jones after having Drew Brees in the 8th. I would actually argue that there's a significant potential that Daniel Jones outscores Drew Brees in fantasy football points in 2020. Cam Newton going off the board at the 13-12. We're really starting to see these quarterbacks go off the board, but similar to the pick with Zach Ertz, my pick with Deshaun Watson pretty much locks me into only taking one quarterback because I'm going to be starting him. He's an elite quarterback every single week unless we see something crazy like an Aaron Rodgers falling to me in the 14th round. Now, let's go through it. Let's try to identify what running backs we would be interested in. And these running backs that I believe have upside really are limited. I think that I'm looking at a guy like Joshua Kelly, but with a guy like Nyheim Hines who may be a better value. The reason I'm not interested in him is I already have my built-in floor at the running back position. I have 2 premium guys with Christian McCaffrey, Todd Gurley. I have an upside guy with J.K. Dobbins, and then I have a good amount of bench spots already allocated to running backs, so I'm not too concerned about my floor at the running back position. At this point, I think I should be going ceiling. But if we do see the kickers and defenses come back to us, I think we may actually just go best kicker defense available. I would not advocate for this in a regular season. Like I said, in a regular season, they are my last 2 picks. But here, whenever I want to be devoting my attention to the waiver wire with the wide receivers and running backs, I think maybe it makes sense to go out there and draft a premium defense and kicker that you're not going to have to stream those positions, and you can save your waiver wire dollars for the guys that maybe suffer an injury throughout the season. Aaron Rodgers at the 1407. I am an Aaron Rodgers hater, but this is great value, especially after actually, no, never mind. I thought Tom Brady was his only quarterback, but when you take Patrick Mahomes in the second round, what I think that does is that limits you to not taking another quarterback throughout the entire draft. Maybe you take one at the very end, such as a Jared Goff, but I can't take Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady together. Maybe you can justify it with saying that Tom Brady was an auto pick. Laviska Shenault goes off the board in the 14th. This is why I need to pay more attention to the board. I did not know that Laviska Shenault was even an option. Let me go down here, scroll deep down to make sure I'm not missing anyone. Denzel Mims may be one of our last round picks, as well as a T. Higgins or a John Ross. There are some great wide receivers down here late in the draft, and I think if let's do the same with the running back before we decide to go kicker defense. Lynn Bowden is a guy that I think has great upside, as well as Raquel Armstead, but nobody really screams out to me here. So I think we're going to just take our premium kicker and defense. We're going to take Baltimore, and we are going to go and just take the top kicker available. And I know this does not seem like it is a plus EV decision, but like I said, I think the theory behind it is this will allow me to go out there and hammer on the wide receiver and running back positions in the waiver wire. And we are just trying to not have to worry about that with the kicker and defense this season when we know that COVID is going to make things crazy. Now the 1502, Nyheim Hines, I think that's a great 0 RB candidate. He's going to be able to provide a nice floor just due to his receptions. But I think that if you have a ton of wide running backs already, it does not make a lot of sense. But if we look at this roster, after going with 3 straight wide receivers in rounds 2 through 3, I think that this roster actually makes a lot of sense for Nyheim Hines, where you may need some instant production to start off. Now let's start thinking about our last 2 picks, even though we are quite far away. But whenever we're here, we're looking for high upside guys. I think that the last 2 picks are most likely going to be dropped regardless after week 1, because this is a year that we don't have preseason football games, so we don't know what to think. We don't know how depth charts are going to line up. And I think after week 1, we are going to realize that we are wrong about a lot of things, and we have to do a good shakeup with our teams. So I want to just take swings on upside guys. I'm not going to go out there and draft a guy that has no upside, like a Hunter Renfrow or a D.D. Westbrook or a Cole Beasley. Those are guys I don't want anywhere near my team in these last 2 rounds. I think I'm just going to go out there and swing for the fences, and maybe I hit. So Lynn Bowden Jr., I'm definitely going to take him with one of my last 2 picks. I think he is a premium player in this format if you can start him at wide receiver or running back, which is what Sleeper is saying, that is his designation. So if that is the case in your fantasy football format, I would definitely advocate going out there and getting a Lynn Bowden. If we look at the wide receiver position, like I said, we are shooting for upside. So who do we think here has the upside to bring us home? I would argue Denzel Mims, but he is dealing with his injury. Let's go and make sure we are not missing out on any tight ends. If Eric Ebron is still there with one of our last 2 picks, we will be taking Eric Ebron. If we look at the quarterbacks, maybe I would be interested in one of these quarterbacks. But the thing is, if they are all on waivers, I am not going to be worried about having a quarterback too. Even if Deshaun Watson gets injured, I will just pick one up off waivers. So I'm not too concerned about it, where the tight end position is a lot thinner after Eric Ebron. So we're either going to go with Eric Ebron, Irv Smith Jr., or Jay Sternberger as our tight end too. Let me change my tone here. I did not realize how many tight ends were still available on the board. So similar to quarterback, I'm going to just roll in with Deshaun Watson and Zach Ertz as my only quarterbacks and tight ends. The rest of my roster positions I'm going to allocate for wide receiver and running backs, just due to there being so many options available at quarterback and tight end on the waiver wire. John Brown, 1602, that is a great pick with pretty much guaranteed production. What was very interesting is we see the Bears and Seahawks go back to back. I really don't like the idea of carrying 2 defenses. Raquel Armstead, 1604, fantastic pick, very high upside pick. I think that is a great move to make. Now, if we're looking at running backs, I think we are going to go with Lynn Bowden Jr. If we're looking at wide receivers, if we are going for upside, I think maybe we go with a Denzel Mims. If we could find someone, it's either going to be Denzel Mims or John Ross. I believe just due to the injury and just due to the fact that I'm going to have to drop someone, I should not go with Denzel Mims, but we do have some time to think. Maybe it would make sense just to load up with 2 more running backs, see how the depth charts are after week 1, then we can be aggressive with our waiver wire bids, drop about 3 to 4 players, and try to pick up better options, because we are really drafting in the dark right now with no preseason games. We don't have a good idea. We are all projecting, and we don't really know. Jack Doyle, 1607. I really don't like Jack Doyle over Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron is a guy that may not be an NFL complete tight end, but he is a receiving tight end, and that's what we get points for in fantasy football. Robbie Gould with the 1608. I have no kicker or defenses takes for y'all, other than I think that this is actually the year to not stream them, and I think this is the year to just go out and get 2 premium ones and then stream your other positions. Baker Mayfield, 1602. I think what we are going to do here is we are going to double up at the running back position, just due to swinging for upside, and that's about it. So let's go get our Lynn Bowden Jr. And who else has upside on this running back list? I think that I was actually looking at getting where is the man? We're a Darwin Thompson, but after Joe Mixon's supposed migraines, who knows if he's holding out, I think Giovanni Bernard is a guy that we are going to end the fantasy football draft with. And now this is how I want my fantasy football teams built. I want them to have extremely, extremely heavy weights in terms of roster spots allocated to the running back position who could pop. I do like spending up on wide receiver early just to lock in a couple studs, such as a Kenny Golladay and a Mike Evans. Now, look at the upside that this roster has, and this is what I'm always talking about when we are drafting fantasy football teams. We want upside. On this team, obviously, we have the upside of a Christian McCaffrey. We just got lucky in getting that first pick, but we also have the upside with Deshaun Watson being the quarterback one. Both Kenny Golladay and Mike Evans could be top 5 wide receivers. Christian Kirk could be a wide receiver 2. Zach Ertz could be a top 3 tight end. J.K. Dobbins by the end of the year could be an RB1. Mecole Hardman could be a wide receiver 2. And I know these are all could be's, and most likely they will not, but that's what we are looking for. We are looking for could be's. We want a ton of guys that could be something, and then as long as about half of them are something, we can cut the other half and replace them with low ceiling, high floor players, but we want to take our shots on these high upside players, just try to hit on a couple of them and really raise our fantasy football production week to week. But that's all I got for y'all. Really hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and I'll be bringing y'all a couple more.